Like, do you even know who you are? I am black, biggity black, American, yes, but bigger than that. Spitting opinions, rooted in facts. Hope you aware the culture is bigger than plats.
Welcome everyone. In case people don't know that this is the redefining masculinity panel, essentially covering that in America the concept of manhood and masculinity has been historically gatekept by white Americans. And in this panel we're going to speak with Asian and Black Americans across gender identities, sexual orientations, about redefining masculinity without gatekeeping. I am your moderator. I am Al. I'm a social worker and a recent MSW graduate. Our first panelist we have is Thomas Stevenson-Shannon, pronouns he, him, his. He had earned his undergraduate degree at Oberlin College, studying Chinese language, Mandarin, and American Studies. He is also a Middlebury Institute of International Studies graduate with a master's in public administration and certificate in Chinese studies. Thomas has also studied, taught, worked in a variety of locations in China, including Beijing, Qingdao, and Xi'an. Most recently, he was the Institute Director of the Alliance Critical Language Scholarship Program in Xi'an. And for the U.S. Department of State. Currently, he is Assistant Director for the Study Abroad program at the University of Cincinnati. In addition to being fluent in Mandarin, very impressive, he has a wealth of knowledge and experience coordinating international educational programs and loves singing Chinese-style karaoke, which I agree is great. Next up, we have Max Bierce, who is a half Japanese Asian American that grew up in Kansas. I've had the pleasure of being Max's classmate in the Master's in Social Work program at the University of Kansas. He also works as a case manager for youth at Burt Nash, a community mental health center here. And last but not least, we have Kevin Ma. He was born and raised in Boston's Chinatown and studied business management at Boston College. As a Bill and Melinda Gates Millennium Scholar, he takes great pride in being one of the first in his family to attend college, which laid the foundation for him serving as an advisor for first generation college students to ensure their success on campus. Kevin's advocacy work also extends to the queer community and people of color, from writing consultancy pieces about LGBTQ plus inclusivity in corporate spaces to leading out for undergrad. Kevin seeks to deconstruct and reimagine professional spaces to make them more accessible and for marginalized communities. His advocacy work has been recognized by the Multicultural Advertising Internship Program community, where he was named MAI Peer to Watch. Kevin started his career at Digitas, which he founded the agency's first business resource group for Asian Americans. Today, he is a strategist at BBH, where he provides effective solutions to his tech and entertainment clients without ever compromising creative excellence. That being said, it's a very impressive bio. You have nothing to apologize for. Now that I've introduced you, I guess I'll give everyone else an opportunity to add anything to talk about themselves. I guess, Thomas, you want to go first?
I'll just start. I'm happy to be here. This has been a wonderful conference. Just connecting with so many different people and thinking through the things that I constantly think through too is just very reaffirming. So thanks for having me.
Cool. Max?
I can go first if there's like some mic issues, but yeah, no, just echoing Thomas, I think this conference has been absolutely amazing. So shout out to all the organizers. The conversations have been super insightful and just very thankful to be here. Like, thank you for gracefully reading my long bio, as I mentioned in the chat. But excited to hear from the other panelists as well. And yeah.
Max, your mic working? Well, I guess we could always. Oh, there's an app that you can. I guess I think you can use through your phone. Oh,
Is this better?
yes, we can hear you.
All right. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, just to mirror what they said, I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to some lively discussion. Thanks for having me.
Cool. All right, so I guess the main question we're going to kind of be discussing here today is how do you guys personally define masculinity? And anyone jump in. I don't think this is it's meant to be more conversational than structured.
Oh, Thomas, you go first, please. Okay, fine, I'll go second. I think for me, obviously at its basis, it's always been the way in which we've conceptualized what it means to be a man in society. And of course, this is often like reinforced and informed by like the traditional gender norms that we're all probably aware of. But I know for me personally, it's always just felt super performative and almost like a very, very strong pressure that's always been looming over me sort of in life as I grow up and go through my stages of trying to act, more tough, more competitive, more powerful, more bold, stand stronger, and even sometimes even more aggressively. And so, yeah, at least for me, for masculinity, always sort of worked against me as a queer Asian man. But something that I've always tried to constantly catch up to or perform, but always knew that I couldn't really ever fulfill it in a way.
Yeah, so personally I would say like my definition of masculinity has gone through an evolution through my life. I grew up in a small town, and my definition of masculinity was essentially framed by media and just what I saw on TV, which a lot of us are familiar with. You know, Asians and black Americans would be kind of limited to certain typecast roles in those media depictions, and so that definitely formed my childhood definition of masculinity. Now it's kind of shifted towards, more just like, I don't know, what I consider masculine is kind of just what I consider like being like a good person, but I wouldn't consider the any of the traits of being masculine as like any different. I don't know, I'm getting lost in my words, but like my definition of masculinity now kind of counteracts traditional masculinity. Like I think it's more masculine to be able to express your feelings and be vulnerable, which counteracts the traditional definition. So that's sort of a version of how that definition has evolved through my life.
I think for me, originally, how I envisioned masculinity is a lot how like Kevin did. I think when he said of this like shroud, this cloud, this need for me to butch it up, and in a reimagined kind of idea of masculinity, I always kind of think back to, I love tattoos and body piercings, right? And so I have a tattoo that says "sweetheart." That's in the writing of my dad, and ever since I can remember, he's called me sweetheart, and my sister is sweetie. And one day years ago, I asked him, well, why do you call me that? Because I mean, it's not, men don't usually call their son sweetheart, like those kind of, endearing names. And he said to me, when I had a son, I decided I was going to love you and I was going to show love. And that's one of the ways I show love. And so for me, that's always this reimagined kind of masculinity is centering of self, particularly in kind of like a capitalist, white supremacist, misogynistic, homophobic kind of world. Centering of self and aligning your authentic self and expressing that authentic self. So him always showing me that love and being like, despite being queer, despite not being, not or society telling us we shouldn't be showing affection to our male children, or even possibly our female or women children, female girl children. I'm still going to do that because that's who I am. That's my being. And that was really, that's a good display of masculinity to me. On the flip side, I also see masculinity in a lot of, honestly, queer friends. So even some of my very feminine queer friends, I actually find them the most masculine because, again, they're centering themselves. Despite this world telling them, hey, you need to cower, hey, you need to diminish yourself, they're saying, no, I'm going to center myself. I'm going to be masculine. So that's kind of my reimagined idea of what it means.
Nice. Yeah, no, I really like the sort of redefining of masculinity with that emotional vulnerability. Because this kind of leads to my next question, where I know personally growing up with immigrant parents, I found out it's very, very normal in East Asian cultures that the father doesn't show much emotion to their kids at all, past a certain age. And it just the mother serves as the emotional conduit and liaison almost between father and children. And I think that probably shaped my own definition of masculinity growing up. But I guess the question that this was leading to is, I'm wondering what does masculinity look like within your race versus outside your race?
Yeah, I mean, just building upon what you said, I am also first generation American. To my parents, both from China, and seeing my dad, I can probably count the number of words he's actually said to me in my life. And so that idea of masculinity was probably the first one that was ever ingrained in my head without me even knowing what masculinity was at that point in my life, of course, but just being there's a level of obedience when it comes to East Asian masculinity. It's very put your head down, say thank you to everything, be very grateful, don't get in the way. And in the way, it definitely one reflected how quiet I was as a kid, and how even today I'm really bad at making small talk, because in in East Asian culture, if there's nothing important to say, it's really okay to sit there quietly. So now when I went to college, or I'm working now in the office and all that stuff, I'm whoa, I'm really, really bad at making small talk. But knowing that stems from what it meant to be a man in Chinese culture.
So I'm half Japanese, half white, but I was raised by my Western half in Southwest Kansas. So, my upbringing and forming definition of masculinity isn't too different from just a normal Midwestern upbringing, I suppose. But it was paired with being half Japanese and visibly so, more so as a kid, maybe. And so, it affected how I thought I was perceived by others, again, based on how I saw other Asian media, and also just, maybe some off-color jokes that kids can make. So it definitely, I don't know, growing up made me sort of think masculinity was or I was another, and that masculinity would have to be something different than that, because I already was disqualified based on being half Japanese and sort of what I saw in media. And gladly, now I've moved away from that, but that was, a tough period growing up of not feeling like you were an equal participant in getting to be seen that way. Yeah.
I think for me, a lot of times masculinity, at least in the Black community, is seen as bravado. And I would want to challenge that narrative in the sense I think that masculinity, just in the society we live in, across cultures, across races, is going to be seen as bravado. And I think because Blackness sometimes can be hyper visible, the way that Black men enact that bravado can oftentimes make it seem like, oh, well, we're more bravado and we're more kind of into this than others, when it's like, no, we just maybe acted out different in a different way. So I kind of want to challenge that narrative, kind of like, oh, that's how we are. Because I've seen a gamut of Black people, Black men express themselves in so many different ways. And to also kind of add to that, I do see those limitations because of the hypervisibility of this is how you should be. I've seen limitations in myself and then in other people of how they feel they should act, which causes emotional issues, which causes health issues, which causes, when you need help, not asking for help. So while that may be true in a superficial sense, I think there's a lot more nuance to how masculinity plays out in the Black community, how it's enacted across even, differences between Black people living in China or French Black people in Africa, Californian Black people, Atlanta Black people, and so on.
That's actually remind me to go back to that. I'm really interested in that because I know you lived in China, and I'm like really curious to see like how like your perceptions of your own like masculinity and being Black like are different in China versus in America, or even the similarities. But something else, that another question that we have is, this kind of goes with what Max was talking about, but like, how does whiteness like ask you to prove your masculinity like in a way that like our own races wouldn't ask us to, and also like in a professional setting, even like outside of like casual settings, like just like with friends or social settings. Also, if I sometimes stumble in my words, so if I like say something and it doesn't make sense, like please ask me to repeat myself.
You're totally fine. I think I'll say real quick, for me, I think whiteness wants me to be hypersexual. And that goes for Black men and women, just to be hypersexual. And I'm just thinking, particularly in the queer community, thinking of whiteness and the honestly just out of pocket ways that some white men will come to me on these apps, like the dating apps and whatnot, and just the familiarity when they don't know Black people in a complex, nuanced way, the ways in which they think I'm big or small, the ways in which they think that I would be down even to like talk Black dialect with them when it's like, you don't even understand that nuance. You don't need, And so I think for that, in that sense, it's just to be hypersexual and to be available in the sense of body sexually, but also in the sense of to ask questions about Black people and answer questions about racism. And like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that the racism is still happening in 2020. Let me tell you about my white feelings about this issue, when I honestly I don't care, because I'm dealing with my own stuff. And I'm essentially dealing with, I'm on a 400 level conversation about race and kind of what it means for me. And you're on this 101 tip. And it's like, that's what Google's for. So I think just being accessible in so many different ways is what whiteness expects of us, particularly in the professional setting as well, which is a whole nother gamut, particularly in the ways of which whiteness wants you to be white with them. So in the sense of like at work, I'm quiet, I do my work, I do it well, but I'm also not trying to be like friendly, hey, water cooler kind of talk, but because I don't necessarily engage in that adamantly, I'm not necessarily seen as always a team player. But again, engaging in that means engaging in whiteness, which I don't always want to do, just because of the drain it can take on me. So
I want to interject something real quick, or build off of that. Something like I learned that I thought made a lot of sense when talking about like cultural humility is that it's by no means someone's responsibility to educate like outgroup for minorities or people of color or whatever, to educate people. And I feel like sometimes whiteness expects that, oh, because you're different, it's your job to tell me how you're different. And so I completely agree with that. I think that's very important for people to know. It's not an expectation that minorities can just educate you, or white people rather.
The original question was, how do I perceive like whiteness or the white perspective to want me to be masculine, more or less? Was that right? Okay, yeah. See, I've never really felt like there was room like that they want me or Asians to be any form of masculine again, because I just feel going back to those stereotypes and media typecasts or depictions that I was aware of, it just didn't seem like there was a version like I'm aware of the stereotypes of I'm supposed to be like smart and a good kid that doesn't break the rules, or and things that seemed almost the antithesis of what I was told traditional masculinity is. So kind of goes back to what I said earlier of I don't feel like there was a very specified path of like, oh, this is how we want you to do it, because those stereotypes seems to be counterintuitive to traditional masculinity.
You say like the expectation from whiteness is that you're not to be masculine?
Yeah, I would say that that's a way shorter and better way to put it. Yeah. And I've only recently in my life, in the past few years, seen a shift away from that, in a more mainstream way of like Asian, more, maybe Asian male models and media campaigns to kind of break down those barriers. But I would say that that wasn't the case when I was growing up, and that definitely affected how I perceived like what the majority wanted out of me. Um, and I would say similar to what Thomas was talking about is like, I feel I've come a long way and like I don't really care so much anymore about thinking about what how they perceive me, and that masculinity now for me is about being comfortable in that and living just who I am in that authenticity. So yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, I think Thomas definitely hit it on the nail. In the queer community, especially on the dating apps, I've gotten some crazy messages before being an Asian man. I'm also like, you can't see, but I'm 5'5", built pretty tiny. I'm sort of expected to be very submissive, very like feminine in the way that like especially white men sort of love the attraction that I'm sort of built closer to what like a woman's body would look like at the end of the day. And that has been very harmful growing up, given just like how I perceived myself, what I found ugly or what I found pretty, and how just like that created a lot of internal self-hate that I'm still even like undoing today. But I mean, in the workspace, I am always pretty gagged by like white men and sort of how they're able to one speak to each other. Like I'll be in the middle of conversations and sort of like their demeanor, sort of like their rudeness to each other. I'm just like, people of color can never get away with talking like that in the workspace. Like I would be like fired or I'd get a warning or something. And the way that white men love to speak over each other, claim work that they didn't even do and take credit for it. I mean, as I'm working more and more, I'm not saying every workspace is like that. I'm not saying every white man in the workplace is like that either, but I've definitely always been shocked at the way that they've been able to interact and sort of go about professionalism in the way that I can't ever imagine doing, at least right now. I mean, I'm still pretty early in my career. But yeah, it's crazy stuff out there.
It's like the whole concept of shifting standards of just if we step outside of these like I guess like barriers that like society is like kind of like what Max was like talked about these stereotypes. If we step too far outside of that, we're seen as deviants. But with white males, if to them those same actions isn't stepping outside of that, that's normal, so it's okay. So like that, yeah, that's definitely an issue in our like even today. And something like hearing both like Kevin and Thomas talk about, and it's making me realize my hetero privileges. I've never really had to consider how my sexuality like intersects with my masculinity. And it's definitely like really interesting to hear both of you like talk about that, and like especially like with dating apps and stuff like that. Like I know, and like I think like Max can maybe like speak to his own experiences, but like for me, like my experiences with dating apps have been more along the lines of like Asian men like don't get much like matches, I guess, is like on the heterosexual side of things. And I know that can also feel demasculating when like I feel like whiteness expects masculinity to have kind of like that same like over sexualization aspect to it, of just like you're a man, so you should be having sex, you should be like hooking up with people, like that's what a man does. But
yeah, I would agree with what you said. I would also just add to that like I've sort of rewired in my brain success on dating apps is more just like, oh, I guess my profile can't be commodified, because essentially that's what it's made for, is to make them money and increase eyes on ads. So it makes me feel less down on myself on those failures. It's like, it's not that I don't have value in that space, it's that I can't like make a buck through the algorithm, I guess. I don't know. That could just be me justifying out loud my own dating struggles. Who knows? But
and Rella in the chat says like, you know, the algorithms don't really promote Asian men's profiles. And while I also have no proof of this, it does make sense, because from my understanding, the profiles that get promoted are the ones that have the most views or the most clicks or stuff like that. And it kind of becomes like a self-perpetuating like snowball effect, or in our case, like a lack of a snowball effect, where like the fewer views you get, the less promoted you get. But moving on past that, the other and this also ties back to something Max was talking about earlier with how he's sort of redefined masculinity. But like, what is the significance of how good or much of a man you are versus like how good of a human you are? Like, does that standard, is it different? And then this also goes back to what Kevin was kind of saying, in like in the workplace, how like white men can get away with certain things that like non-white people can't. Is like, does that standard differ, or is it expected in like relative to white men?
So I feel like this kind of touches upon how I answered like the first question of how I eventually masculinity, the non-toxic form, I suppose, you know, like it's just blended in with just general humanity and such. So I don't see those as different anymore, because I can't remember the last time I said like, oh, we should have done that because you're a man. It's like, no, usually I just say like, you should have done that because that was the right thing to do, or what a moral person would do. And you know, so yeah, there's just, in my mind, there's that overlap, and it's among things that we've been talking about showing your authentic self and being centered in that and comfortable expressing that, among other things. Yeah.
I think it shifts differently in the sense of who you are based on race, sexuality, class, gender, in the sense of, I just think it shifts. And back to kind of what Kevin was saying, the things that, you know, some white women at work, what they do, and the white men, what they do at work. And it's just like, if I did that, I would be called in and let's have a disciplinary action. And we have to have a correction plan. And this is an issue. And they literally just did it a minute ago, and it wasn't an issue. So I think goodness is not neutral. It's very much, I mean, we can definitely come up with some ideas of what is goodness and what works in a society to have good people. But even that will shift when, okay, after we've established what it means to be good, kind, respectful, empathetic, if someone who's white is not empathetic, then they can still be seen as good. in a lot of cases. So yeah.
By being white, you're automatically given like the benefit of the doubt, and like of course like it's not like true all the time, but like enough where it's noticeable. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And especially in the workplace, I think about this a lot. Like, as if you're a white person, you sort of walk through the door and you get to sort of just start creating your presence and affirming yourself. But as, someone who comes from a marginalized community, when you walk through the door, I feel like you first have to undo all the perceptions that are already hitting you before you can actually start creating and affirming your presence at work. So it's almost like a two-pronged thing that is a lot of work and it's super unfair. But obviously, um, with generations rising, I would hope that the workspace is changing, and I think it definitely is. Of course, it's way better than what it was before. Yes, there's so many issues. So hoping that, of course, whiteness and masculinity still doesn't always get the promotions. If anything, damn, like they should be getting dinged and getting pulled into HR, if anything like that. And it sounds cheesy, and like there's this motto at my last agency, BBH, is where I used to work. It's just like super simple, very cheesy, but like just being good and nice, regardless, at the end of the day, really goes a long way. Especially like I work in the advertising industry. We're not saving lives. I'm not going to sit around saying that like my work is like changing the world at the end of the day. And so like, at least in my field, I always just think like I'm sort of lucky to be working in a creative space. Like there's no need to ever be sort of rude or ding anyone, given that this is supposed to be fun work at the end of the day.
Also, building off your point of how like people need to be held accountable to their actions, and like especially when like the standards are different, it also frustrates me when like there are cases in which minorities will call out those like when they need to be called out, like white people specifically. But in those instances, like we're usually like deemed as like too sensitive, or it's just the joke, or they don't understand, like it's not part of their culture to like make those kind of jokes. It's like it's not part of my culture to be like like to not be a dick. Like that's like ultimately it. Like I don't think that's too much to ask. And Daniela posed a pretty good question in the chat. As an LGBTQ person, do you feel your masculinity is challenged or not respected?
No, I don't. But again, I think that's the other side of the coin of being hypersexualized. Is like, well, of course you're gonna be masculine because you only want really masculine men, even though I'm not masculine in that traditional sense. So no, I don't think so. And I also think that's culturally specific. So in America, and within the queer community, that might be seen as one way. In the general kind of greater community, that might be seen a different way. And in China, guess what? That's actually going to be seen different, because in China, I was seen in some ways a lot more masculine than I am. And I think that was just because of limited media representation of Black people in China. Not to say that there's not Black people in China, because in all the places I've been in China, I've always met some other Black people, right? So I think it's culturally specific, and even like within a group can be specific whether that masculine is viewed as, or that my masculinity is challenged. Yeah.
And then piggybacking off that question, sorry if I pronounced this name wrong. Aleja. Okay. Aleja asks, have you ever felt like you need to lessen your masculinity if you identify as queer?
I think that's actually a very interesting question lessen my masculinity. I've never felt like I had to, but I always, I guess, like to. I mean, like, I like to sort of just like play around with gender in the way that I, speak or dress or anything in any terms of my presence. So, like, I've always tried to reject traditional notions of masculinity or like how that is supposed to look like to other people staring at me. But I bet some queer people do feel like, I don't know, like they maybe have to like get their nails done or like, I don't know, like look or dress a certain way because they are queer, even if it actually isn't what they want at the end of the day. Like maybe they feel like they can't wear just like a t-shirt and cargo shorts because if they went to the gay club like that, they'll look straight or something like that. So I feel like there could be some pressures on that end.
The that also like makes me think about, like, do you guys think femininity and masculinity are like opposite sides of a spectrum, or do you think there can be like an ambiguity of like you can be both masculine and feminine? Especially, I think it was Max or Thomas said earlier that like, some of the more masculine people they know are those who are like, let themselves be more vulnerable to their feelings, which is traditionally like perceived as a more feminine trait.
Yeah, trying to gather my words here, but I feel like the traditional sense of femininity and masculinity is meant to be those two sides of the coin because it's meant to put us in specific roles. And so in that traditional sense, I don't think there's meant to be much overlap. But I think we've been talking a lot about how our perception of masculinity been breaking down, and we've been having to draw distinctions between traditional sense versus how I see it now. And so I do see it all kind of melding together in me. Again, more worried or concerned about being a decent, kind person. And I feel like that has fluidity across all genders. Yeah. We're talking about gatekeeping of like masculinity by whiteness. Like I don't want to gatekeep the possibilities of masculinity among men, just like I want to incorporate positive femininity in my own, and let that out, if that makes sense. So traditionally, I think it's supposed to be two separate things, but I think as we're all growing and conceptualizing it different, we see that there's a lot of overlap and with just being a kind, decent person, I don't know.
Yeah. Anyone else on that question? Okay. And there's also that actually is a pretty good segue into an earlier question Alija asked about what does it mean to be a good partner? Like it's like I guess like some people say you have to be a good man. But what does it mean to be a good partner in a relationship, like regardless if it's heteronormative or queer? And I think this also follows along with like a common theme we've been talking about of just it's less about being a good masculine person, but more about being a good person.
I think a good partner in any relationship, no matter the orientation, is someone who is intensely interested in you as a person, in your well-being, in your development, in your growth, who's not jealous or or might be jealous, I don't know, but is able to handle those emotions on their own and know that it's not a you problem, is able to listen, and is able to argue too. In the sense of, as a couple, you're going to have arguments, but how do you argue in a healthy way? How do you argue in a way that's not demeaning to yourself or your partner or partners? Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and yeah, just emphasize which you already did, but like right that crosses all different types of intimate relationships. Yeah. Uh, but but also, yeah, I agree with all that.
Yeah, I think Thomas definitely hit it on the nail. I mean, I'm really bad at dating, but at the end of the day, just like someone who brings out the best in you and is someone like when they're around you or you're around them, you're always just rooting for them to succeed. And as Thomas mentioned, can sometimes result in arguing, but making sure that whatever the lesson you're supposed to extract from that, that's the biggest part that you're getting and not simply just butting heads. But yeah.
Something I believed before this panel, but I feel like I am believing even more strongly is just that these like concepts like masculinity are these like social constructs that really don't matter. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how masculine or feminine or whatever. It's more about just being a good person. I think that's that's my main takeaway from everything we've talked about so far. But something I said I wanted to talk about, and before I forget, is I want to talk about Thomas's experience in China as a black man. Basically the thing I asked earlier was, do you feel like your concept of masculinity like differs a lot there versus here, or is it the same, just looks differently?
That's a good question. I think it looks differently, and for many ways, so I feel as though sometimes I can be a little bit more freer in China. And I think it's also different. One, because I actually speak the language, so I'm able to, look at the bus schedule and go where I want to go on my own and tell the cabbie where I want to go. And I have deep relationships with people in Chinese, so we can talk about love and sex and relationships or whatever. And I can take myself to the hospital, which I've done, all those things. So that gives me independence to be able to really enjoy different people that I normally wouldn't if they didn't speak English or I didn't speak, Mandarin. And I also think the masculinity is challenged in the sense of here, otherness is not a good thing. There, it can actually be an asset. So I'm trying to kind of take that into account. So that kind of sort of privilege of being like other and what's up with that? So that otherness kind of bumping up my masculinity, so to speak, particularly when I see, but I would always see, I would always see, and I don't mean to be crude, but use a scale of 1 to 10. I would always see 8, 9, 10s, beautiful Chinese men and women with like 3, 4, 5 white counterparts or black counterparts because of that luxury of that otherness is being seen as a luxury, right? So in that sense, my masculinity was bumped up a bit. In the other sense, it wasn't bumped up because I'm gay, and gayness is different in China. And so, but again, because of my otherness and my masculinity being bumped up, people wouldn't automatically read me as gay. And so I would have to tell them, hey, I'm gay, before it was like, oh, wow, I would have never known. So I think it's kind of multifaceted. And then one thing I'll say about masculinity is that, again, talking kind of about the centering of self, one thing I always had respect for and admired was I had a lot of Chinese gay friends who some chose to, I'm going to not get married. I'm going to, live openly, so to speak. And then there was a lot of others that were like, I'm going to get married to a woman and I'm still going to form a gay community where I have a boyfriend, where I have gay friends, where I am living my truth still in a way. And for me, I saw them as both very, again, masculine in terms of centering yourself, because I think coming out is a lot of times Western concept in the sense of you come out and we're not going to give you support, right? In terms of we're not going to give you support of, well, how do you change a culture? How do you change something culturally so that people have the support to come out and that they don't lose their families, that they don't lose their jobs, that they don't lose their sense of identity and belonging because of who they love? And that's not to say that's not important, but I always admired my Chinese friends that made strategic decisions about their lives in the situations that they were in and still formed loving, healthy relationships and communities with other people that were like them, which again, centering that like I just thought was very masculine of them, whether they were femme or not. So yeah. So long story short, very complex, and just the different layers of my identity also kind of informed how I was seen as masculine or not in China.
Thanks for sharing those experiences. I lived in China for a few years, and I also had a black friend there, but definitely like it's not like it's nowhere near like hearing the lived experience of someone. So it's definitely very like enlightening, I guess. This is about the part of the panel where we do audience questions. Not that we weren't already, but let's see if there's any questions from the audience in the chat. We can bring those up. But meanwhile, I'll read what's already been said. Rella mentioned that there's a different level of freedom in China than there is here, and it's very counterintuitive to what we think of China versus what we think of America, the land of the free. But yeah, even while like their laws are more restrictive, the society does feel a lot more free on a different level. Let's see.
Also, so many people over there, like walking through this, like felt like no one was even looking at me. And it was like I studied abroad and lived in Hong Kong for a little bit, and it was really crazy to like feel in the center for once, like because I was part of the majority, and the power. I mean, not power. I guess like the way that sort of like in that time span, I was a little younger at that point when I was studying abroad. But looking back, sort of like the confidence that built. But as Thomas mentioned, like, yeah, when you add on the layer of queerness in Hong Kong, I was so fascinated by the way people build their communities and sort of like build their lives, especially like in China. You also don't really like move out of your family's home. Like you like live with your parents for the rest of your life, which is I absolutely cannot. I moved out the second I could once I made enough money. But yeah, and it was also sort of crazy, like how like people wouldn't just assume that I was queer in China because like I like masculinity is like so different over there. Like you can like have blonde hair, dress a certain way, and still be like straight. But in America, I walk down the streets of Brooklyn and like, yeah, you can clock me for being gay real quick. But yeah.
That is actually something else I've noticed in China, was that they are a lot more they're a lot more comfortable with their sexuality. It's almost like there's this expectation that men are heterosexual, where you would have situations where I feel like you wouldn't like I guess examples like it would be very common for like a bunch of dudes to hang out in their underwear together like in a room just because it's hot, versus I feel like in America there's sort of this like insecurity with my sexuality. It's like, oh, if I hang out in a room full of other dudes without clothes on, like, am I gay? And it's like, no, that's not what makes you gay. But I do find that interesting. Connie asked a question saying she was saying that, or I assume I shouldn't. I definitely feel so conflicted about how she, her, and him, he, him pronouns have associated conjured images when people just use default pronouns, just based on how you look. What are your thoughts on pronouns and its connection to masculinity?
So I personally don't have a problem if someone comes in and uses a pronoun based off my appearance. I think my like where I would take umbrage is if someone didn't respect the pronoun that I expressed as my preference. And if I corrected them and that wasn't respected. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but generally that's not something on the outset that has bothered me. But it would bother me if if I corrected them and that wasn't respected. And I would say that's disconnected from my definition of masculinity, and that would go for me and anyone who ascribes to any gender. And so, yeah.
I think in terms of pronouns, one, just never assume these days. You definitely just like use someone's name or like be polite and just like asking straight up. I feel like you can just literally be like, hey, what are your preferred gender pronouns? And it's definitely not a weird question. I think like it's becoming normalized to that point. And I think in terms of masculinity, I think like being able to choose your own pronouns is literally a way to fight or sort of like reject notions of masculinity if that was sort of your tactic in doing so. Yeah.
I think along with that, I think for me, sometimes pronouns have actually made me more comfortable in my masculinity in the sense of like within the queer community, like sometimes my gay cisgender male friends who go by he, him, and her, it's like, oh girl, da 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 da, you know, and it's like that's, you know, whatever. And then I also have very hyper masculine gay friends that don't say that. And that's fine too. And on the flip side, I've had conversations with women, and the conversation gets so good, and they'll say, "Oh, girl," and then they'll catch themselves like, "Oh, I didn't mean to," but and I don't take offense in the sense I know they didn't mean that as I'm trying to misgender you, but I feel so comfortable with you. Our conversation was so flowing, so good. It was like, oh, we're just, you know, chatting it up, and then them trying to kind of tidy up because it's like, oh, I didn't mean to call you that, and it's like it's fine. In the sense for me, it might not be fine for other people, but again, being comfortable with at least some, you know, I should be using he, him, his pronouns, and someone did not refer to me as such. What does that mean? And again, that's in a like cisgender context. That would be totally different. It was a trans man that was having to deal with that issue. But for me, it's actually made it more, it's okay for me more comfortable in my masculinity of like, she called me a girl, which is associated with women, feminine. That's not an issue.
Conversation about pronouns in our country, it makes me really appreciative of the Chinese language in one respect, where verbally he, him, she, hers, it's all the same. So like there's never that question of preferred pronouns, at least spoken, which I really like. And I mean, like I understand like language has like deep roots, but I do kind of wish we would move away from gendered language. It'd just be easier in a lot of areas. I think one last question we can do from the audience, from Alija, is what's something viewers can do to uplift and support Black and Asian men moving forward from this panel? Like, how do we show up as allies and redefining masculinity? Also, what might that look like?
I mean, I feel like maybe for me, the most impactful thing someone can do, and it's, you know, it's kind of like working out a reflexive muscle and might take a while, and other people might be on this journey already, but working to, you know, breed out thought, or like push out thoughts of, you know, what expectations are there of Asian Americans or Black Americans that you wouldn't put on white Americans, based on stereotypes and media depictions. If you catch yourself thinking like, or expecting a certain set of behaviors or hobbies or language or something else based on that racial identity, then just, I don't know, check yourself, I guess. And, you know, I feel like it's a spectrum, and there's some people who are just starting that path, and there's some people who are pretty far along it and still, you know, have those thoughts and are like, oh, wait, is this, you know, like that white perspective kicking back in? So I would just don't expect me to behave or fit in a certain role, because I'll disappoint you, because I largely don't fit that. And I would just say extend that same space to everyone else so that they can be that authentic self, which I think we've all agreed upon is what that healthy masculinity looks like, is just being comfortable and expressing that authentic self outwardly.
I think the first thing that's also like pretty easy, even if you're coming to this conference, is just like educating yourself, like read the books, the authors, the podcasts. There's no reason that you should be defaulting to like having an oppressed person explain their oppression at this point. Like literally like read an article about it. I'm tired of explaining it. Not my job to teach you on that. And then on this one note, I think there are a lot of things that the Asian community has to do for the Black community. I think we have a history of just being silent and complacent. So showing up for BLM, Black Lives Matter, showing up for your peers, interjecting in moments where Black people could use the benefit of someone just interjecting. And then lastly, this could be pretty simple as well, and also only if you have the means to, but just donating to the organizations who are out there doing the work, marching the streets, all the BLM organizations, all the organizations that are fighting against Asian hate crimes as well. Like if you have the means, that also goes a long way.
I think for me, it's all those things that Max and Kevin said. And also along with that, giving Black men, Asian men the space to emote, to have feeling. That's not just those associated with kind of masculinity. Truly accepting those in the queer community too, in the sense of like, I've heard of some, and this is, I can only speak for the Black community, but sometimes Black women might be like, oh, I'm fine with having gay men as friends, but I would never date a bisexual man. And the kind of all those things, well, why wouldn't you? And there's a whole nother panel, but just kind of interrogating what's there. Why would, kind of interrogating what's your own biases against how Black men should be. And on the flip side, not letting Black men get away with stuff, not saying that Black women are the caretakers, but in the sense of I've seen some Black women who are like, well, he can do this bad behavior and not be held accountable because he's a Black man and he's going through it. And it's like, well, yeah, he's going through it, but so are you. And so even if someone is going through it, even though they are being marginalized and having all these different systems of oppression kind of, raining down on them, so to speak, you still have to hold people accountable for their personal decisions, actions, and their impact on you and then our general community.
Everyone. Wrapping up, does anyone have any last words or any like shout outs to like where we can follow you, or what if anyone's published or written anything, something like that? Cool.
I just want real quick, I think y'all are all cool. I've had such a great conversation with y'all and learned a lot, and just, wow, I'm blown away. So thank you.
Yeah, no, echoing that. Just thank you for everyone for sharing and listening. Max, Thomas, don't want to up your name. Ow.
Ow, that hurts.
Love that. Thank you so much. This was great. My Instagram is at Kevin_MAA. If you want to follow, of course, but that's what's on the table.
Yeah, it was great speaking with both of you, and I feel like I learned a lot and expanded my perspective. I'm not very active on social media, so I'm sorry you won't find me doing much there. But
nice. Well, yeah, this hour really flew by. It was great talking to all of you. So yeah, this module, this panel's closing out, and I guess stay tuned for the next one.
All right. Take care, everyone. Nice talking.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Like, do you even know who you are?